Tonight,
God willing, I don't think we're going to see a recession.
Fears over a looming economic crisis and how the White House is playing down the possibility of recession. Plus,
I'm a Christian, a conservative, and a Republican. In that order,
the former vice president and his old boss returned to Washington for two separate events as 2024 speculation heats up. And in Ohio's Silicon Valley,
this really is the Super Bowl.
The multi-billion-dollar rescue plan to fix an alarming shortage of semiconductor chips. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation.
Is America heading towards a recession, or could we already be in one? Welcome to Faith Nation. I'm Caitlin Burke.
In Washington, I'm John Jessup. With no end in sight to soaring inflation, many Americans want to know, is recession around the corner? The Biden administration has an opinion, and it says no.
That denial, though, comes in contrast to recent economic numbers. CBN News White House correspondent Abigail Robertson brings us the latest on where things stand with the economy in tonight's top story.
As fears of an economic recession grow across the country, White House officials are trying to assure Americans that everything is fine.
This is not an economy that's in recession.
Sunday, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen credited the current economic slowdown to historically rapid growth in 2021. She pointed to the economy bouncing back from the COVID shutdowns and claimed we're not in a recession because the labor market is strong.
You don't see any of the signs now. A recession is a broad-based contraction that affects many sectors of the economy. We just don't have that.
President Biden is also trying to stay away from the R word.
My hope is we go from this rapid growth to steady growth. And so we'll see some coming down. But I don't think we're going to, God willing, I don't think we're going to see a recession.
The Federal Reserve is expected to hike interest rates by an unusually high 0.75 of a point this week for the second time this year to combat inflation.
We are crippling ourselves.
Speaking at an America First Policy Institute event Tuesday, Republican economists and lawmakers criticized President Biden's economic policies.
Free spending, reduce regulation, make tax cuts permanent, and you'll unleash the economy. This administration is doing the exact opposite, and it is causing inflation.
Republicans believe inflation will be the driving issue in the 2022 midterm election.
We've already seen what they've done to wreck our economy with massive spending and crazy far-left socialist regulations. Stop the madness. Help is on the way in November.
Thursday, the Commerce Department is set to release a report which some predict will show a contraction in the American economy for the second consecutive quarter. If so, that performance is generally defined as a recession. Reporting from Washington, Abigail Robertson, CBN News.
All right, thank you, Abigail. For more on this, we're joined by Steve Skanke, Chief Investment Strategist at Keel Point. Steve, thank you for coming on Faith Nation. So I understand that there's probably a classical definition of recession. More importantly, rather than just the definition, do you believe that America is in one right now?
I don't believe that we're in a recession right now, and I do believe that the GDP first estimate that comes out on Thursday morning will show positive growth in the second quarter. But even if it doesn't, which will allow people to say, well, 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth, this is a recession. The reason that isn't the full definition is because you can have situations like what we have now, where we're really not in a recession, and yet we have 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth.
Tomorrow, the Federal Reserve is expected to release their latest guidance on interest rates. What do you expect?
Well, we expect that it's going to be an increase of 0.75% in their federal funds rate. They've been trying to fast track getting the Fed funds rate up to 2.25 to 2.5, which they have said is the neutral rate of interest. The neutral rate means that at that point, the Fed policy rate is neither restrictive nor accommodative. They've been trying to catch up with the wave of inflation and believe that the 0.75% increase announced tomorrow and that they did 6 weeks ago will help them do just that.
Steve, can you talk about the impact of increasing interest rates and what that will mean for the average American?
Well, for the average American, if it has an impact on bringing down the rate of inflation, that'll be positive, because right now Americans are spending a lot more of their disposable income on energy, food, rent, and less on some of the discretionary items. And we saw that phenomenon show up in earnings reports that are being announced this week, where more is being spent on food. Consumers aren't spending less, they're just spending more of what they have on things that they need to have. So if the Fed's action can help with that, that'll be positive. For people who are living on fixed income, higher interest rates will allow better returns on savings going forward in the future. But because this is the inflation that we're in right now is a supply phenomenon, it's a little bit hard for the Fed to solve it just by moving to a restrictive monetary policy. And that's sort of the conundrum, and that's the frustration of
Steve, we are unfortunately
are going to feel and express.
Steve, we're unfortunately out of time. Thank you so much, Steve Skanke with Keel Investment. Thank you so much.
Some good news on the economic front. Falling gas prices continue to offer a little relief at the pump. According to AAA, in 11 states, the average price for a gallon of gas has dropped below $4. Nationwide, the cost averaging at $4.27. That's down from $4.90 just a month ago. But compared to this time last year, prices are still high. The average for a gallon in July of 2021, $3.15.
5 days after testing positive for COVID and going into isolation, President Biden's doctor says the commander-in-chief's symptoms are nearly gone.
This as his administration prepares a sweeping initiative to develop next-generation COVID-19 vaccines. They claim the new shots would dramatically reduce rates of infection or transmission while building on previous protection.
Senior Washington correspondent Tara Merchner joins us now. Tara, we understand that experts now concede COVID-19 will be around for the foreseeable future. What's the administration trying to do to get ahead of it?
John, the White House is kicking off the effort with a summit that includes government officials, scientists, and pharmaceutical companies who will discuss new technologies and how to develop them.
Continue these discussions, continue these collaborations to instill confidence for people.
A show of support for developing a new generation of COVID-19 vaccines from scientists and Big Pharma.
To be able to solve a problem this big, this massive, it really takes just a tremendous amount of stakeholders and a tremendous amount of commitment, investment.
One of the biggest hopes, a vaccine that would prevent infection no matter the mutation. While current vaccines are said to be highly effective at preventing serious illness, they have proven less capable of preventing COVID transmission and spread, presenting a massive challenge.
Our job is to facilitate by providing our scientists, brilliant scientists, many of whom are in this room right now, with the capability and the support to pursue the scientific leads.
These talks come as the administration is still struggling to convince more people to get vaccinated.
I absolutely want to do my due diligence to keep others safe, but certainly as we're a few years into this with the vaccine, I wonder if it should just remain each individual's personal choice.
The CDC estimating 71% of Americans over age 5 have received an original 2-dose vaccine series. Only half of those eligible received the first booster, and far fewer the second. Surveys also show that half of unvaccinated Americans say nothing could convince them to receive a COVID shot. There are also signs Biden's vaccine initiative may get a lukewarm response from Americans weary of the pandemic. And with a price tag estimated in the billions, many lawmakers could be unwilling to fund it. The CDC just signed off on Novavax's vaccine, which is said to use more conventional technology than Pfizer and Moderna, with the hope it might change American minds to get vaccinated. John and Caitlin.
All right. Thank you, Tara. Speculation runs wild with high-profile visitors in Washington spotlighting the 2024 presidential race when Faith Nation returns. And welcome back. Former President Donald Trump made his first appearance in the nation's capital since he departed the White House on the day of President Biden's inauguration. He's here in Washington to deliver the keynote address at a summit hosted by the Conservative America First Policy Institute, where he blamed President Biden for weakening America and vowing that Democrats will soon lose hold of the power that they have.
This November, the people are going to vote to stop the destruction of our country, and they're going to vote to rescue America's future. I'm here before you to begin to talk about what we must do to achieve that future when we win a triumphant victory in 2022 and when a Republican president takes back the White House in 2024, which I strongly believe will happen.
And elsewhere in D.C. today, Trump's former Vice President Mike Pence addressed a group of young conservatives after dueling rallies held Friday in Arizona. Today's Trump and Pence speeches sparked questions of if and when both men will officially throw their hats in the 2024 presidential ring.
For more, we bring in editor and publisher of Inside Elections, Nathan Gonzalez. Nathan, thanks for joining us. Mike Pence wasn't on the guest list at the AFPI summit, and during his own speech to young conservative students today, he encouraged to focus on the future, not the past. But all eyes are on the tension between he and former President Trump. Last week, they even campaigned in the same state for opposing candidates. What do you make of all of this?
Well, you know, it doesn't happen often where you have a former president, a former vice president kind of jockeying for position like this, because usually the former president, you know, can't run again, or just the situation is different. What strikes me is that this isn't really a fair fight right now, that when we're talking about Trump versus Pence, it's not on equal footing. I mean, the Republican Party is still President Trump's party. Vice President Pence is trying to look to the future and be an alternative for voters who are ready to turn the page or turn to a new chapter from Trump and look ahead. But I think Pence actually is kind of squeezed on this when we're talking about a future primary, because for voters who have never liked Trump, you know, he was the vice president for Trump for 4 years. For voters who Trump is their guy and they like him, Pence is essentially a traitor because of January 6th and what he did or did not do on that day. I think it's difficult for Pence to get there on multiple levels. I'm not sure what the constituency is for him within the Republican Party right now.
We've got a midterm to get through before we get to 2024. But while we're on the topic, Nathan, a Yahoo News YouGov poll shows, if I can get that out, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis closing in on former President Trump in a head-to-head matchup. They're just 9 points apart. Another poll of preferred candidates from the University of New Hampshire shows Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg and President Biden essentially dead even. I know we have a long way to get there and a lot can change, but what do you make of these polls and what do they suggest about what Americans are thinking about who should lead the country?
Yeah, you know, going back to the Republican side first in that specific poll, I think that Trump's hold on the Republican Party has weakened a little bit over the last few months. And I think this poll is evidence of that. I'm not sure yet whether Governor DeSantis would challenge Trump in a primary. It would depend on the field and depend on where we are a year from now. On the other side, I mean, Secretary Buttigieg is not going to challenge President Biden. I mean, it's a fun poll to, I guess, talk about. It's just, I think, so absent from reality. You know, if Biden runs again, I don't know that he gets a clear shot, but I don't think it's Buttigieg who sort of steps up to the plate and takes on an incumbent president. It would be a big step for anyone, particularly him.
Right.
Real quick, Nathan, the Wall Street Journal and New York Post, both conservative-friendly publications, dismissed former President Trump as unworthy of another term in office. Does that suggest Trump's hold on the GOP and conservative politics is slipping?
Well, I think we have to look at it at multiple levels. I think that for these editorial boards, maybe for some big donors, maybe some politicians are ready to turn the page from Trump because they see some of the negative aspects that come along with him in his policies. But for grassroots voters and Republicans, President Trump still remains popular. And I think that it's going to take more than just a couple of editorials to kind of shift opinion on a broad scale away from Trump.
Nathan, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us. Nathan Gonzalez with Inside Elections, and we'll be right back after the break.
Welcome back. Lawmakers are looking to stamp Made in the USA on semiconductor chips. New legislation known as CHIPS Plus would provide roughly $52 billion in funding for U.S. companies to produce the chips here at home.
The pandemic made clear with unforgiving clarity how America's chip shortage was creating a crisis in our economic and national security. This morning, the Senate will draw a clear line in the sand that America's chip crisis and America's dwindling commitment to science and innovation will not continue under our watch.
A procedural vote on the bill passed today, 64-32. Supporters hope the bipartisan legislation will clear a full Senate vote and then quickly pass the House. The goal? To get it to the president's desk before lawmakers leave town for August recess.
Well, semiconductors are critical to the digital world, essential for powering an online economy and playing a huge role in our nation's cyber defenses.
But as you just heard, America's facing an alarming shortage of these chips. The good news, a rescue plan is underway. CBN's Heather Sells traveled to Ohio to bring us the details.
Intel's $20 billion investment will go in right here. Many see it as a sign that America's heartland is reviving, that those seeking high-tech jobs will not have to leave home for the coasts.
You don't win the game in the fourth quarter by just showing up then.
Kenny McDonald says Columbus business leaders have followed that game plan by calling semiconductor makers for 10 years, making the Intel deal all the more rich.
As somebody who's been an economic developer for over 25 years, this really is the Super Bowl.
The multi-billion-dollar investment is the largest economic development package in state history, and Intel's first new manufacturing site in 40 years. It means 3,000 new jobs that carry an average salary of $135,000, plus 7,000 construction jobs and more. Intel is committed to building 2 chip factories, or fabs, just outside of Columbus, near a new Albany business park, and the site can accommodate up to 8. In 10 years, Intel plans to reach that capacity with a total investment reaching $100 billion.
I think the final thing was we were hungry. You know, we wanted them to come.
Governor Mike DeWine is elated. As a lifelong resident, he is well aware of the decades of decline endured by his home state and the entire Rust Belt. Winning the Intel bid marks a renaissance moment.
It really sends a signal that Ohio and the Midwest is certainly in the game in regard to, manufacturing anything.
Until now, the heartland has found itself in the tech industry's rearview mirror. Mark Murrow at the Brookings Institution follows the tech geography.
It's not spread extremely widely. It's highly concentrated in a very short list of big coastal superstar metros.
Murrow says that's a problem for those in Middle America.
They're cut off in some ways from some of the most vibrant sources of jobs and social and economic mobility.
It's why the Ohio decision could signal that the tech industry needs and is capable of geographic diversity. Columbus area banker Laura Tussing says it could slow the flow of those leaving the state for better jobs.
People are going to be able to make career progressions and expand their businesses, within our state. They don't have to go somewhere else now.
This move could also provide much needed momentum for America's fragile semiconductor industry. That's the mentality that McDonald says kept his team going.
It wasn't just about Ohio. It was about solving a global issue and a national priority. And that got us through some tough days.
A shortage decades in the making is now underscored by the conflict in Ukraine and other supply chain problems. Thanks to offshore manufacturing and foreign competition over the last 30 years, the U.S. has watched its share of global semiconductor manufacturing drop from 37% to 12%. It's a profound loss given that semiconductors power the entire digital economy.
We're seeing very vulnerable, shaky supply chains right now, and it's disrupting the U.S. economy. It's contributed to the major inflation challenge we faced this year.
Of course, just one major investment won't solve the country's supply chain and national security issues, nor can they be solved overnight.
It shows the possibility, and it hopefully heralds further investment.
But it could put the U.S. on the right track, especially if Congress passes the CHIPS Act, which would provide some $50 billion to support this manufacturing at home. For now, McDonald and his economic development team have their work cut out for them.
It's a totally new game. So we got another field to run now, and we're on the 1 yard line.
The new game includes building the factories, sourcing and training the workforce, and creating communities around them that maintain a high quality of life.
We have a lot of work ahead of us, and we're just pumped up to do it.
If Intel succeeds here, not only could it mean a silicon heartland, it could shift chip production back to the U.S. and strengthen America's supply chains, economy, and national security. Reporting in Central Ohio, Heather Sells, CBN News.
Finally, tonight, from military strikes to package deliveries, drones are increasingly becoming part of everyday life around the world.
And sometimes they serve as eyes in the sky. And that watchful gaze recently came in handy helping save a life at the beach. A 14-year-old teen in Spain was seconds away from drowning when the unmanned drone was deployed into action, dropping a life jacket into the turbulent waters. The life preserver kept the boy afloat until lifeguards arrived, pulling him into a boat and safely to shore. Well, that's pretty amazing technology.
How do I ensure there's a drone following me at every moment to make sure I'm safe?
Is that what you really want?
Maybe not. That could go bad.
Well, thanks so much for watching Faith Nation.
Have a great weekend.